Hi there, this is Sherry from Life Plan. The following video that you're going to watch is an interview that our men's coaching director, Greg Rensberry, did with two of his friends, Bill and Rahel. It is an excellent interview that really goes into the impact that pornography can have in a relationship, specifically a marriage relationship, but also steps that can be taken to bring healing and hope in the midst of that struggle. It is a video that I think everybody should watch, and we're giving it to you as a resource during Rap Week, White Ribbon Against Pornography, to kind of help raise awareness for the dangers of pornography, that it can affect not only individuals but also relationships. However, having said that, some of the material contained in this video may not be appropriate for all ages. If you have younger children nearby as you are watching this, you might want to get earbuds or headphones or watch it at a later time. Also, they do talk about trauma in here, and some of it might be triggering to some of you who have not processed past trauma. So keep that in mind as you are watching this video. As always, if you need further support and help in this issue, please reach out to us at LifePlan. You can find out about us by going to our website, lifeplan.org, or you can call our office 269-684-6200. Thank you, and may this video encourage you today.
Well, hey, everybody. This is Greg, and I am with Life Plan in Niles. For those that are curious, I'm the men's coaching director there and have been there for a little over a year. And today, I'm just so blessed to be with Bill and Rahel. It was about a year ago that I met Bill kind of face to face. And what compelled me to get a hold of Bill and Rahel again is that I heard their story. And it was, to me, it really touched my heart. And it revolves around a pretty big issue in our culture that is just, I think, getting bigger and bigger. And the issue of just the effect of pornography, not just on the macro level with our culture, but how it's also impacting good, godly people that love God and want to serve Him, and it's impacting the church. So I want to kind of get out of the way here, and I'm just going to kind of open things up for Bill and Rahel to share their story however they would like to do that. So it's all you guys.
Thank you so much for having us, Greg. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think I'll go ahead and begin. My story began as a kid. Pornography has as large of a role as large as it is in our world today. Really, the average age, as research is showing, some studies say average age of exposures around 13. Others is as low as 9 or 8. And anyway, so pornography exposure at a young age does something to really affect the brain. And so I was a kid, and at about age 10, when pornography got introduced to me by a friend from church on one day after lunch, after church, and we got on the computer and he began to introduce me to it. And I didn't really know what I was looking at. And there was shame and fear attached, of course, to the excitement of the moment. And anyway, that mixed bag of emotions really set a hook deep in my soul, deep in my heart. And that was at age 10. It was the same friend that introduced me to masturbation. And because of some difficult things a little younger than that, I had already developed a life of fantasy in my own brain. Not sexual fantasy, but just fantasizing to escape. And so all of that then really developed into the storm through the rest of my adolescent years into really a full-blown pornography addiction. It really got, for me, paired well as it was the 90s and 2000s, and computers were everywhere. The PCs, personal computers, were really on the rise. Internet was developing very quickly, from dial-up to cable and to what we have now. Anyways, all of that through the 90s what just really affected me into the early 2000s when I graduated high school. So really from 10 to 18, I was lost in a maze of pornography and addiction and video games, and just kind of struggling with this area of my life. Now, I grew up in the church, but there's really nothing ever talked about regarding sexuality or pornography in the church. I don't recall any conversations in any of my church activities, youth group activities, really nothing. Um, and so, uh, and so this just really plagued me for all those years, and was really very difficult. And then to kind of catch up maybe a little bit more to our story, as I went off to Bible college, I left the friend of pornography on the front doorstep, because there was no real internet at the Bible college except for in a computer lab down in one room that was monitored. And so that friend I left pretty much on the doorstep of the Bible college as I was there. And then as I finished up and left and went to work in a mission context overseas, it was at that time that my parents separated, divorced. My dad had an affair, and it just really ripped my family apart. And it was as a result of the pain of the separation and the divorce of my parents and all that followed, that I went back to pornography. And I thought I had it kicked. I thought I was free. I was good for life. But the pain of family trauma from all that had happened settled deep into my heart, and pornography became the friend that I went back to. And even though I served in ministry for several years thereafter, I was in a binge purge cycle where I would act out, and then I'd dread and hate myself for doing it. And I'd commit to the Lord, I'll never do this again. And then a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later, I'm right back to the thing I didn't want to do. And that cycle continued to one degree or another, sometimes more regularly, sometimes more spaced out, really until I got married. And it was there when my wife and I got married. We'll come into that story in just a moment. When I realized that 19 years of addiction really did have an effect in breaking my mind, breaking my brain, and the pain and the wounds resulted from pornography and all the relational trauma really became aware for me, became a real thing that I needed to address and deal with in my life.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I'll try to give a little background too, and then we can talk about how that interconnects with each other. But so I also really, I don't think I really even probably heard of pornography, but I did grow up in a family that talked a lot about sexual integrity and sexuality, and it was very open and good and healthy in that way. But my parents never talked to me about pornography because they talked with my brother about it, like just not thinking that would ever be something I'd have to deal with. And so I do remember, I started dating a guy in college, and I remember, asking him if he'd ever watched porn, and he said, "Oh no, I've never watched porn." And I, of course, just naively believed him, like just not realizing that probably most guys have at some point at least looked at it, even if it's not an addiction for them. So, I just never brought it up again. I didn't feel like it needed to be. And of course, there were other, I would now consider them red flags in our relationship, but we dated for 4 years, and my family loved him. Everyone loved him. He's a very charismatic, wonderful person. And so I got married, not kind of ignoring some of the other red flags that kind of probably would have clued me in if I'd known what I know now, but I didn't. So, and he was also lying. So, lying about it as I discovered soon after we got married. So that began a 10-year marriage for me of affairs. He was a full-blown addict and acknowledged it, but never really got help. Would say that he would get help, but then never would. And so it was very difficult for me. I turned away from God. I got very sick, physically, emotionally. I blamed myself because he blamed me. So I felt like it had to be my fault. And if I was just a better wife somehow, that he would stop. And eventually he left. So left and married someone else, divorced me. And it was devastating at the time because I really had been praying so much that God would bring about a reconciliation and that we could have a ministry of hope and healing and share this with people. Because by this point, I'd started to do some healing of my own. I'd started to go to therapy and, read about other people who had healed and learned from this, but that was not what he was interested in doing. And he also just had a lot of brokenness in his life. And I recognize he wasn't doing these things to hurt me. I still don't believe that to this day. I think he just was broken and hurting. And this was his way of escape. And that's all he knew. So, but it destroyed me. Like I lost years of my life. It's still those 10 years of my life. In some ways, I feel like I'm 10 years younger than I am because those years were just bad. I mean, I ended up still I went to school during that time. I got degrees. But I was slower. Everything, it just felt like laborious and difficult life was. Depression, suicidal thoughts. I struggled with the gamut, all of that. I had to be on medication for a while, in and out of the hospital with various illnesses, none of which I have anymore. So just a lot of trauma really can affect someone physically as well. And so I, spent 2 years just really in the depths of healing, lots of therapy groups, reading books, everything under the sun that I could get my hands on to try to understand what had happened and what porn addiction was and all of this stuff. And during that time, of course, I mean, I would tell people I had just started my job that I have now, and students would come and ask me. They knew at least a little bit of my story. I wasn't sharing a lot at that point. I still don't want to because my ex-husband, I think, again, while he really hurt me, I don't think he intended to, so I'm not really wanting to destroy him in any way either. But they would ask me, if their boyfriend or whatever was watching porn, I'm like, run, don't go, and you don't ever talk to, I was very extreme in my thinking because of what I'd been through. I don't advise that now. I think it matters more what the person's doing with it. I think almost everyone has looked at porn, even many women have. So, but what are they doing with that? Are they seeking healing? Are they seeking, healthiness and to address their issues, or are they not? I mean, I think this applies to anything in life. You're never going to find someone perfect. So, but that was actually one of the things that attracted me to Bill, was because we'd been friends for a long time. But when I found out, I don't remember exactly how it came up, but he shared that he had an addiction to porn in the past. And then was just, that he was healing from it and had accountability partners. And I was just like, I'd never heard a guy be open and honest about that. And I'm like, this is different, right? I mean, I don't really want to get involved with someone again. This is, years now after my divorce, like 4 or 5 years later. Like I wasn't really planning on even getting married again, but man, if there's someone who's really open about their issues, maybe that's something that I could consider. And so, yeah, go ahead, keep going, Bill. That's kind of my angle from it. I'm coming with a lot of trauma from my previous marriage, and but open, I think, to someone who was healthy.
Yeah, and more specifically, betrayal trauma,
Right.
which is really a different kind of trauma than some of the other traumas that are there.
Yeah, I didn't have trauma from my childhood. I had a very good childhood. I mean, obviously, no family's perfect, but I really didn't have it. It all came from my first marriage.
Yeah, and so, I don't remember at what point that I shared with Rahel. It was long before we were dating that I shared with her that I had struggled with pornography in the past. It's amazing how the mindset of denial can really cover up or prevent someone from seeing what's really going on. And so, at that point in my life, this was, probably 7-8 years ago now. We've been married for 5, celebrated 5 years this year. Yay. And anyhow, as I shared that, I was like, yeah, I used to struggle with pornography as an addiction. That was in the past. Not really realizing that a binge purge cycle is really just as addictive as whether I'm acting out regularly. In some cases, some researchers pointed out that a binge purge cycle is actually more addictive than compared to someone who would go to pornography on a regular basis. The same goes for like alcohol or any other drugs or addictive substances. And anyhow, yeah, I thought I was pretty okay. Like, yeah, I only struggle like, every couple months, once a semester or school term in college, or that kind of a thing. I thought, hey, it's like once every 3 months, 2 months, 4 months, 6 months. It's not really an addiction anymore. I slip up. Oh, okay, well, I'll just won't do that again and shame myself for it, and then beat myself up, and cope then with control behaviors to try and compensate, or workaholism to compensate for the acting out, and then kind of do that for several weeks, months, half a year or so, and then then I'd relapse when I'm feeling stress or angry, or something really really affecting me, lonely. At those points I would feel I would then relapse. And so I'm thankful to counseling, which about a decade ago, which helped me to kind of peel back the layers of pain from the trauma of my parents' separation and all that had happened there, and divorce, and the betrayal of the affair, and that was really helpful. And that gave me the glimmer of hope that maybe perchance God could actually heal me from this. And pretty much, as I've been running groups now for 4 years, and pretty much I share with every group, it's okay to go to counseling. And about a third of guys usually go to counseling because it's just so needed. There's other deeper things going on. And it's important to point out here that pornography is a symptomatic behavior that's revealing that there's deeper brokenness inside that needs help. And so for those listening to this, like, remember, like, porn is a sin. It's not a good thing. It does corrupt society. It is a sin, but it's also a brain problem that really stems from woundedness or past trauma in a person's life. Well, anyways, so I'm going through this counseling. I share that with Rahel, and thinking that I'm pretty okay. I'm fixed, and so the binge purge cycle was becoming wider and wider, further and further apart, and thinking I'm okay. I'm over this. It's not a problem anymore. And then I don't know if I want to get too much further ahead. Rahel, do you want to say anything else before I begin our engagement or our dating?
You can go ahead, and then I'll share my thoughts.
Okay, great. So as this is going on, eventually, some time goes by and we begin to date. And during our dating and engagement, which is over a year, a little longer than a year, I'd relapsed 5 times, and I can't remember specifically all the details around it, but I remember that there were like 5 key occasions where I relapsed in that 1 year, or a little over a year. And so I didn't really share those with my wife. So we dated,
Girlfriend at the time, but yeah.
Girlfriend, fiance, until just a little bit before we actually got married, just maybe a couple months before, I actually shared that I had relapsed with pornography a couple of times, masturbation a couple of times, and I was feeling a lot of shame about that. I thought for the most part that I was over this, that it wasn't really an addiction or anything, but I was still broken. I was still engaging in habits and behaviors that were unhealthy for me and our relationship.
Yeah, and I think from my angle, I had so when Bill shared that with me, it was really hard to hear, of course, and I felt like, what am I getting myself into? Is this going to be very similar to my first marriage? And I had been talking with my therapist all through our relationship. So, you know, I felt like I worked through it. I almost broke up with him, but I worked through it and realized, you know, like no one's perfect. He's at least sharing it with me, like could be worse, you know. Um, I think if I had it to do over again, I would have asked him to be in therapy at that point. He was not at that point. And I think that would have been a wiser plan, to just say, hey, like, I think we need to postpone our wedding a little bit. Yeah, and this was like maybe what, 3 or 4 months before our wedding, and be like, I want to see you in a healthier place, you know, of like sobriety before we get married. But I wasn't in the place to see that at that point either. And I think looking back now, I see a lot of, again, I wouldn't call them red flags as much with Bill, but they were more like yellow flags of things that I look now and I see, oh, those were from the results of his addiction. Even though he wasn't acting out regularly, there were things that he did that he doesn't do anymore, you know, that were not good and not healthy and somewhat dysfunctional. So, but I think part of it for me too was just coming out of a super duper dysfunctional marriage and having never had, like, my parents' marriage is amazing, but I'd never experienced that for myself. And so what I had with Bill was a whole lot better than what I had before. So I had a hard time evaluating, you know, how I should think about our relationship. And so yeah, I think I would have done it differently. I hope I believe that I would not have broken up with him, even knowing what I know now. But there's better ways I could have dealt with it. And I think another part of it for me was also that I really, really, I had felt very undesirable. One of the things that my ex-husband would always tell me was that I was like, if I left him or divorced him or whatever, like no one would want me. And so, you know, that really resonated with me. I'm like, well, he knows me better than anyone else, right? So like, this obviously must be true. And so I felt, and I had been single for 5 years. I'd wanted to date people, but no one had ever been, I'd even asked guys out. They'd all said no, you know? So I just felt like that just kind of confirmed to me that I'm not desirable. So I think from my angle, even though I'd done a lot of healing, it wasn't a like self beating myself up thing. It just was like, okay, this is just the reality. And I poured myself into my work, and I love my work and my ministry to kids. And, you know, like I had a very full, beautiful, wonderful life. So I was not feeling any sort of need to get remarried. And so, but then Bill wanting to marry me, I was like, well, I don't want to lose this. Right. So like, I think there was a part of that in my mind as I look back, you know, that made me realize, you know, I maybe, even though I was trying so hard to be objective, you can never be fully objective when you love someone, right? So it's like there's still that level of wanting it to work, that I did not hold him accountable in ways that I wish I had.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So we get married. So my last relapse with pornography was in May 2017. It was before we got married, and I'm thankful today that I can say I've not looked at pornography since then. I've had a couple relapses in other ways, but I've not looked at pornography since then. I'm very thankful for that, and it's been a long journey. You know, after we got married, it really became clear to me about the depth of sexual brokenness in my life. The years of consuming pornography and masturbation, the years of living in a fantasy world in that way had such a it marred my brain deeply when it came to relating with my wife in healthy relational and sexual areas of our marriage. And so after getting married, I thought, hey, things would be great. Like I seem to have a pretty good sex drive, you know, like I thought everything was pretty normal. And then after getting married, I quickly realized my brain is not normal. But at the time, I didn't realize it was my brain and the years of addiction that it had on me. And so there's a lot of shame, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration towards myself, a lot of self-hatred, frustration towards my wife, anger at other people, and just yeah, just those first 6 months really revealed the depth of brokenness in my life and how deep the dysfunction had been for me until pretty much about 6 months into getting married. Rahel basically said to me, look, you need to get help or we need to rethink our marriage. And she didn't use those exact words. That's the best I can summarize my memory of that moment. But it was very clear to me that this cannot continue. It's not helping me, it's not helping her, and it's hurting us. It's hurting us. So by an amazing, I don't know how God did this, but a friend of my wife's, one of her best friends, said, hey, have you heard about the Conquer series? And the Conquer series was produced by Ted Roberts, the founder of Pure Desire Ministries, and produced, about 10 years ago now, maybe a little less than. And so I remember as my wife brought that up to me, well, what about getting the Conquer series? Like, no, I don't need that. Oh, that's so expensive. Like, oh, we don't need to do that. Counseling will be fine. And, like in my denial and my brokenness, I still didn't think that I needed a whole lot. And justifying spending that much money just to me was like, nah, like, let's not do that. We don't have money. We just got married. We don't have a whole lot of money. Why should we do that? And anyways, I don't know at what point that I finally was like, okay, let's just go ahead and do it. Let's just get it. And then I began to watch it, and I was blown away from the first DVD. I'm like, wait a second. There's something here that I've never heard in my 30 years of life that is actually explaining to me what's going on and how I can actually find help. For years, I've served in ministry, reading my Bible, praying more, and always thinking if I just read my Bible more, if I just pray harder, this will go away. If I just, I've gone to altar calls, confessing to God, God, forgive me, like cleanse me, heal me. I don't want to go back to this again and again and again and again. And I kept going back. And watching through the Conquer series to me blew my mind. And at that time we started counseling with a certified sex addiction therapist. And so these two began to dovetail together as really I began to work on what's called a shame core. I had such strong negative thoughts about myself, just a core mindset about shame. I'm always putting myself down. I could never receive affirmations because the negative narrative in my head was so strong. I would always just push away, minimize, deny affirmations, and just keep that negative feedback loop in my head going on all the time. You're not good enough. You're worthless. You can't do anything right. You're not smart enough. You're unlovable. You're not worthy. Even though I'd been in ministry, giving Bible studies, leading people to Christ, this had been really the negative narrative in my head for years. And so it was in that first stage that God really began through a series of incredible divine appointments and things in my life, a collective of things in my life, that I began to address that root of brokenness around that shame identity. And I'll pause there before I continue on into the rest of that journey.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about is that when people are facing, similar, like they're approaching marriage, and maybe the guy is struggling with pornography, and of course, increasingly more women and girls, unfortunately, are viewing pornography as a way of almost sex education, which is horrific to think about, but that is what is happening in the younger levels. I know you guys are aware of that, but a lot of times you think, oh, well, I'll get married and that'll just solve everything. And as you know, and as I've learned, that's not the way it happens. Bill, you bring up wonderfully, there's your brain is so powerful in this whole scenario that there has to be healing on all different levels. But let me let you guys get back to your story.
No, that's such a good point. I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think there is that feeling that marriage is just going to solve it. And it's still very common, that I think even though I had read so much and understood so much, I kind of had that sense too, right? Like, great, I want to have sex with Bill. This will be wonderful. It'll just help him and he won't struggle anymore. It's just not the case. So because it's you've become accustomed to looking at something on a screen and giving yourself pleasure rather than actually entering into a relationship with another person. And that's very different. And you have to kind of retrain your brain to want that versus something else. So, I think it was a really difficult first year of marriage for me too. And I'm not certain that I said quite a direct, like, I'm leaving you if you don't get help, but just like, this is a really serious thing. And I saw our marriage going in the same direction as my first one, and I did not want that. And I was scared of that. And, I'd never, like, Bill had never been angry before when we were dating. And of course he was probably, but it was probably just channeled into porn or, fantasy or whatever. And so I didn't see that either. So that was also very scary for me. And it just fit this pattern of like, it's coming out in other ways, right? Even though he's not acting out in porn, it's like all these other things are happening and that he needs help. So, and I actually, I don't believe God caused my first marriage. I made the choice to marry my first husband, even though I saw these red flags, and I saw red flags, even though no one else did. And I just kind of listened to other people rather than listening to myself, which, it's never a good plan. Listen to your gut about what you feel about a person. It's often the Holy Spirit, I think, working through there. But I, if it had not been for that, I would not have known or understood what was going on with Bill, because of everything that I'd been through in the past. I learned a lot, and I think I knew, probably going into our marriage, knew more about addiction than he did, just because I lived with it, read a ton about it, tons of therapy groups, all of this. And so, and I'm not saying that that's a proud thing, but just that I was able to see things that he couldn't because of what I'd been through before. And so I think, that's something that God used, even though God didn't. I don't believe God causes bad things in our life, but he can use them to help other people. And I never expected to use that to help my own husband, but that is what God did. And so, I think it's also amazing to me that I had prayed that prayer years ago, that I really wanted to have a ministry of reconciliation and helping people find freedom from sexual brokenness. And I felt like, well, that's just obviously not going to be answered because my ex-husband left me and everything. But now Bill and I are doing that, and it's just really neat to see how God doesn't forget our prayers. And sometimes it takes him a long time to answer them. I mean, I know sometimes he can't fully answer them till heaven, but I do think that he is working in our lives all the time to answer our prayers as best as he can in this sinful world. And it was a neat thing to me to see how once Bill started the Conquer series, he's like, oh, I'm going to start a group right now. Like, before he'd even finished, he's like, I got to tell people about this. And, so just seeing how he chose to pursue health, and that was, again, from the beginning, what attracted me to him. So even though we've had a lot of difficulties in our marriage because of his addiction and because of my past, and like, I think that's something that's always, I've always seen in Bill. Like, sometimes it may take him a little bit, but he's always willing to pursue wholeness and health and recognize where he's been wrong and pursue a different course. And I think that's all you can ask for someone, like for any of us, because we're all broken, we're all sinners, and being willing to say, hey, I've been wrong here. I'm going to turn my life the other direction. Is really meaningful to me to see.
That's good. Hey, so, we, some people that are tuning in today or listening are hearing things like Conquer series. Would you give a snapshot of Pure Desire Ministries? I mean, I could do it, but I'd almost rather have you do it. You probably have even maybe a greater synopsis of describe Pure Desire Ministries. That is certainly something that we at Life Plan have tapped into some of the resources in that, and we want to continue to explore that, and we are. But what is Pure Desire Ministry? And then you can keep going on however you want the story to unfold.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. The Conquer series, like I said, was the founder of Pure Desire Ministries, is the featured speaker in the Conquer series. And so I didn't know what or who Pure Desire Ministries was. All I knew was Conquer series, and I just jumped everything. What's that old 90s song, Christian song, I'm going deep, I'm in all my head, I want to be, the river's deep, the river's wide,
Stephen Curtis Chapman, right?
Yeah, Stephen Curtis Chapman.
Yeah.
We're old. We're all old.
Yeah.
Yes, we are. Sorry, everybody that's younger.
Yeah. Anyways, so it was like that. It's just I just jumped in, and I invited 15 friends on Facebook, and I was like, look, I'm doing a group on pornography, Conquer series. Here's the book material, order it, and then show up at my house on this day. We'll meet for 2 hours. We'll meet for 12 weeks. And we went through it. 12 people showed up. I think 10 people stuck it all the way through. And that began the first group. And then, and then I did another Conquer series. And that first Conquer series had two, then, that I led, grew into 2 groups. Then it grew into 3 groups. Okay. And all the while, the first year and a half, I didn't really know about Pure Desire Ministries. So I knew Conquer series, great resources, great materials. Hey, that helped me to get on-ramped into healing journey. And I recommend it as a great resource to get on-ramped, to get the basis. What does this look like? How do I find healing and help? And then through there, I began to learn about Pure Desire Ministries. And Pure Desire Ministries has been around for over 2 decades, or almost 30 years, I should say. Started in the early 90s in Gresham, Oregon, with Dr. Ted Roberts, as he was pastoring a church there and recognized that sexual brokenness was just everywhere. And so he began to study about it. He went in for training with Dr. Patrick Carnes, who was the leading researcher in this space in the world at that time, and went and studied with him. And his prayer goal and desire was, I want to bring the Bible and science together so we can have a whole complete picture, because so many Christian guys and Christian women are trying to read their Bible and pray more, hoping that this will fix it, not recognizing, there's much more to this that we need to find healing to. There's a brain that needs to be healed, and we can bring God's power and his word and his grace with the science of how the brain can change and heal, and the practices, the scientifically proven practices that can change the brain, bring these together to really bring about a holistic healing experience. And so, Pure Desire Ministries has been doing this now since the early 90s. And they became a nonprofit ministry in the mid to late 2000s, by faith, stepped out by faith as a ministry. And it's been beautiful to see what they've done since, with the additional resources and podcasts and blogs and yearly summits and so much more that they are doing now. And if it wasn't for Pure Desire Ministries and Ted Roberts and all that God had done with them and through them, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I'm so thankful for that. And so,
and they have resources for betrayed spouses. They have resources for young people who haven't been married. So young women, young men. So there's just a lot of different types of resources for parents. I mean, it's really, I think, a really great place to find help for these things.
Absolutely.
The little that I've looked at, not little, I've done a bit of research and things with Pure Desire too, that it's very holistic. Like you said, it just covers the whole family. And I think that's an important thing to mention, because sometimes when we talk about pornography, we automatically kind of turn to the guys and say, okay, guys, and But in the wake of that are people like Rahel. Of course, hearing your story, it's Rahel, you had like a double trauma, because your first marriage created a traumatic experience with lots of different fingers to it. Then leading into your marriage with Bill was you were hoping you weren't playing the replay button here. And so I think that's important, though, that if we have a ministry to men to help men, that we got to realize that there is, again, a woman that is involved too, that feels helpless in very, very different ways. The traumas are very different. I don't, if you want to share more of your story, I'm totally open to that, but I wanted to make sure to ask, as we kind of maybe round this out, is if each one of you, so Rahel, if you knew that there was a woman watching this right now who maybe is sitting where you have sat, are there words that you would want to share with her to give her a sense of hope? And I want to ask that question to you. And then Bill, I want you take the guy. If there's a guy watching that maybe his story maybe mirrors or matches closely some of your story, what would you tell them? So let's start with Rahel as we maybe kind of land the plane here. So.
Yeah, I think we've gotten to the place where we can land the plane. So I think two things come to mind. One is that it's not your fault, right? It's very easy to take the blame. I mean, it doesn't mean you haven't done things in your marriage that are not good, right? I mean, we're sinners, we make mistakes, right? But if your spouse is acting out, it could be, let me just talk to betrayed spouses, because it could be a guy whose wife is addicted to porn, right? So
right.
I think it's really important to recognize that it is just not your fault. You can't have more sex or be better looking or, do anything they want, and they're still going to look at porn. So there's nothing you can do to stop them. And it's not your fault that they are that. And that the massive majority of them brought porn into the marriage. So, from some other coping mechanism. And so it took me a long time to believe that. Yeah. In fact, I still struggle with those feelings that come to me of like, oh boy, I've made a mistake, or I'm not available for Bill right now. Is that going to make it a problem for him? Right. I mean, I still have those thoughts that come to my mind that I have to fight away. That doesn't mean you don't try to be the best person you can be, but you're not responsible for their indiscretions.
Right.
And then secondly would be, I also really struggled with this, like, come on, it's their problem. Why do I have to do work to heal?
Yeah.
Like I've put in so many hours and months and years of my life in healing. And sometimes that makes me really angry because I didn't do this, right? Like, why am I having to spend boatloads of my time when I could be doing other things, more meaningful things in my mind, right? Than having to heal from my partner's sin. But that's just life. People hurt us.
Yeah.
And we are not responsible for them hurting us, but we are responsible for what we do with that hurt, right? Do we go to live in bitterness and frustration and anger? Whoever has hurt us, maybe it's our parents, maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a friend or a coworker. Or do we pursue healing ourselves? We may not be able to reconcile with that person. They may be abusive and you may decide to end your marriage, right? If your spouse is not willing to choose healing, but that doesn't mean you don't still have the responsibility to choose healing for yourself. And I think this is one of the hardest things. I went kicking and screaming back to group. I did not want to go back to a group. I'd continued in therapy, but I'm like, I don't want to do this. Like it's so much time and energy. But I came back to the same thing. I need healing. Even though I didn't cause this to myself, I still don't want to live in pain and suffering. And I need community of people that understand. And so find that community. I mean, counseling is amazing,
Yeah.
but groups, especially for those who've been betrayed, are so important because you realize, oh, I'm not crazy. Other people are feeling the same way and going through the same thing. And you can really, I mean, some of my closest friends are friends I've made in groups because they know everything about me and all my struggles and trials, and yet they love me. And it's just, there's nothing like the community that comes out of people who are going through the crucible with you.
Yeah. No, that, and I wanna just applaud you, Rahel, for hanging in there. And I think one thing that you said that was powerful is I picked up on this, the idea that we need to give ourselves permission to be angry if we are the betrayed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what we do with that anger is, that's important, what we
Right.
do with it, but it is okay to express that anger. And I think in the Christian culture, we have shied away from that and said, "Oh, no, you can't be angry." Well, yeah, you can.
Anger and sadness and grief, all of these
Right.
emotions are,
Yeah,
we need to feel them in order to move through them and beyond them.
yeah, that's a great way of phrasing it. So, well, Bill, if you were face to face with a guy that was really resonating with your story and shared it, what words of hope might you give him today?
My dear brother, what I would say to you, you are not alone in this, and there is help. There are resources for you. And I know you love Jesus, but it's time to take the next step and to be more intentional in finding help. And it's okay. Join a group, find a group, get involved with a group. If there's none near you, find Pure Desire and start your own group. Gather some friends, gather some guys from church or your community. Say, hey, let's watch this together. Let's learn, let's grow. I know it can be a really difficult step to make. Sometimes anger is the motivator for me to keep going in my own recovery journey because I hate the effect that all the porn and all the shame and all the self-hatred and the negative thoughts about myself has had an effect on me and my marriage and my relationship. So I just want to tell you, my dear brother, like there's hope for you. It's a journey of generally 2 to 5 years for the average guy, because our brains need to heal and our brains take time to heal. And this affects every area of your life and all the ways that you do life. And so I just encourage you, find a group, connect with a counselor, a trusted person that you can really talk things through with, and get connected with some resources that can really help you. And remember, you're not alone. There's average of about 68% of men in any church USA are dealing with this issue. And for you ladies, if you're struggling, if you're the struggler with unwanted sexual behavior too, there's help for you too. And the shame, the hurdle of shame is more for you, my dear sister, because often porn is just seen as a man's issue. It's a man's problem. It's not a woman's problem. It's a man's problem, but it's a human problem. And I just want to let you know that you're seen, and there's help for you too. There's resources for you also. And just my dear brother, my dear sister, as you think about this, like just remember the presence of pornography or unwanted sexual behaviors affecting you, your marriage, your life, have their root origin in something much further back in your past. And so get to know what's going on. It'll probably be the most difficult thing you've been through in a journey in your life, but it'll be the most rewarding, because on the other side, truly, and I'm here to tell you this, truly there is freedom, there is hope, there is a life, and all that comes with it. And as one pastor shared I think in a Pure Desire podcast too, we get the privilege of the struggler of living 2 lives within 1 lifetime. There's the addicted life. We get to put that to rest, put that to death in Jesus Christ, and come to newness in him, and then live a new life fashioned with what we really want and desire and to pursue. for the rest of our lives. So that's what I have to share with you.
Yeah, great. Well, hey, just on behalf of Life Plan, I want to thank you, Bill and Rahel, for your time today, which is precious, as you know, and we all know, and just grateful for your story that you've been able to share today. So thanks again for tuning in with us today, and we pray that this will meet you where you are, and that you will, if you need to, reach out to Life Plan, reach out to people you know and trust, a trusted pastor, and get the help you need. So thanks again.